it's not gonna change. The beatings will continue until morale improves. But Kalel Mullings is the one dealing out the beatings, and until you can stop that, Michigan's gonna keep running with it. Jace and JP, Michigan and Ohio State. This is the Rivalry Podcast from River Radio Ministries and presented by Elevated Integrity Construction. My cardiologist has asked Michigan to stop playing 30 minutes of football and to actually finish out an entire football game.
I didn't get to watch the entire game live while it was happening
what point did you leave? What was the score when you turned away?
I didn't get to even start it. I had to watch a replay of it because it was my brother-in-law's bachelor party this past weekend, and we were knee-deep in a one-shot campaign on D&D. So while I was playing Arm & Hammer, my fighter dwarf, I was also simultaneously switching to Google Chrome on my phone and seeing updates.
Was that move effective?
It was, honestly, a great time had by all.
Could we use that for Michigan in the second half moving forward? We'll get to Michigan, Minnesota. We'll talk about Washington. We've got Ohio State and Iowa and Michigan State and Rutgers. There's a lot.
We're going to say some jokes about how bad Florida State and Michigan State both are.
But first, let's break the ice with a little bit of a wheel route. As always, at Rival Pod across social media and at rivalpod.com. You can see we got the Rivals Till We Die Rivalry Podcast shirts out here.
Spin that around a little bit.
In scarlet and gray, maize and blue. Get yours, rivalpod.com. Help support the podcast. We appreciate it.
Your team's MVP so far this year, who do you got?
I mean, Michigan's this easy, right? Like it's Kalel Mullings.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I mean, the man has put the team on his back. He is the reason. He's the reason. And by the way, we'll get to this. I love the fact that he was a featured back this week. 25 carries.
Yeah.
25. Let me double check that.
24, I thought. 20. It was around there. It wasn't far off.
Whatever it was, it was a 24-9. There it is. 24-9. Mullings carries to Donovan Edwards feature exactly the way it should be. Mm-hmm. I like the fact that they moved Edwards out. They tried to move him around. They had him open. We'll talk about that. But I like the fact that finally we're going, okay, after 4 weeks of slamming our head against the wall, why don't we actually give the man who's having success the football? Kalel Mullings, the team MVP so far.
I think for me, for Ohio State, there hasn't been a Kalel Mullings type player that's been like, this is the clear-cut guy on offense. I mean, you've got Jeremiah Smith, who's balled out. He's been an just athletic freak. I mean, the dude's made plays, but we'll talk about him. There's not been a game where somebody's had to be the Kalel Mullings type player, so I don't know if I would even say that. I think there's a lot of guys that are kind of competing for that for me right now. Jeremiah Smith is up there. Travion Henderson, but not for the reason that you're thinking. I think he's been effective. His blocking this season
been real good.
Has created numerous plays. And then Lathan Ransom. I think Lathan Ransom has been the go-to guy on our defense this year so far. He had a massive game this past weekend. So if I had to go, I'm going to go with Lathan. I'm going to go with Lathan right now because I feel like it's too obvious.
Did you think that at the beginning of the year, we've made a lot of, you can go back for several years now and see the Lathan Ransom jokes we've made on this podcast. Did you think Lathan Ransom would ever be somebody you said, yeah, he's competing for team MVP?
So after, it was 2 years ago where he was just getting burnt repeatedly against Michigan too, where he was just getting left in the dust. And last year he really improved. So this year my expectations were that he would be that leader for the defense. So I'm not surprised by it now. If you asked me 2 years ago and you said Lathan Ransom is going to be your guy on defense, I would be very nervous about that thought. Very nervous. Now I feel confident with him back there.
All right, so let's jump right into Michigan, Minnesota here, because Michigan for the second week in a row, this is the big storyline. Michigan for the second week in a row plays a fantastic first half of football, dominates Minnesota. Really, I was going to say both sides of the ball, really all three sides of the ball, if you want to look at that, is they have a blocked punt in there as well. The defense and special teams both setting up the offense for short fields. Obviously, with Michigan's offensive struggles, that's beneficial. They cash in both times.
Yeah.
This is a team that looks like they are rolling. And then you get to the second half. And really, I'd even say you played most of the third quarter pretty well as well. But with about 4 minutes to go in the third quarter, Alex Orji drops back, throws a deep ball, which, by the way, love the play call. You're going to have to be able to execute stuff like that. Love the play call. Drops back, has Donovan Edwards wide open. There is not a man around him. Doesn't see him. Throws the ball to Colston Loveland. Does not make a great throw on the ball. Gets picked off. And you're thinking, okay, You like that they're taking a shot.
Mhm.
You're going to have to do stuff like that. Yeah, he missed Dono. You want that back, get in the film room, fix it, whatever. But from that point forward, it seemed as though something switched for Minnesota, because Minnesota would go on to score 21 fourth quarter points. Michigan escapes 27-24 by the skin of their teeth. And by the way, did everything they possibly could, despite all that. They did everything that they possibly could to give Minnesota the ball on the onside kick. Get to that in a second. And once Michigan actually gets the ball, still fumbled the ball off of, I don't know if it was a bad snap or if Alex dropped it. I mean, just everything that could have gone wrong for Michigan to lose that game happened, and they still came away with the win.
Another game where the first time that the opposing team gets into scoring position, they miss a field goal. Which happened. It happened at the very beginning. I don't know what it is about Michigan opponents this year.
The big question for Michigan is going to be, and there's a lot of details in there too. What is happening in the locker room between the first half and the second half? Because once is okay. That's bound to happen. I'm going to argue that it's been at least twice. I think that's pretty clear. USC a week ago, Michigan dominated USC in that first half. And then something flipped in the second half. Michigan dominates Minnesota in the first half. Something flips, not even in the second half. I'd say late third and fourth quarter. I was going to say
almost the entire fourth quarter was just Minnesota. It was still
24-3 in the headed to the fourth. Okay. So something's happening. You could make arguments. I think also you could argue Fresno State, though I'm hesitant to put that one in the same category. You could argue Arkansas State. I think that's just a very different situation. But 2 weeks in a row now in conference
honestly,
play,
I would even say Minnesota, because granted, it was closer than you would have liked it to be. But even one of those touchdowns came with like 40 something seconds left.
But see, but they are still in the game though at that point. Like,
you could get an onside kick.
This didn't feel well. And did you? So I know that you were busy doing stuff.
So I watched the replay of it. So I've seen.
So Minnesota. So this is a very different scenario from garbage time score, yada yada. Like, this is Minnesota still in the game when they score that touchdown. The onside kick, by the way, I know there's a lot of frustration from Minnesota around that. Here's what I'll say: the offsides is a terrible call. The offsides, he wasn't offside. I have not seen a single replay. I get that the officials down the line. I don't like the call. As a Michigan guy, I don't like the call. This happened with Michigan and Penn State, maybe, I'm guessing here, 7 or 8 years ago, where Penn State had a similar situation, kicked off, recovered the onside kick to give themselves a shot to tie or win the game, and they got called, I believe, for offsides on a real technical call. What really should have brought it back was Minnesota. There was a question about maybe illegal touching of the football. It was kind of hard to tell that for sure, but definitely there's illegal blocking. You have to wait for the ball to go 10 yards before you start blocking if you're Minnesota, and that was a violation. So either way, it comes back. But if you're Michigan, my biggest question isn't, thank goodness we got bailed out by the onside kick. My question is, how do you find yourself in that position? What is change? I don't know if something is changing. I don't know if it's just a momentum shift. And here's the best way that I can try to wrap my head around. I have asked people, by the way. I've tried to pool my friends and be like, hey, what do you think? What's wrong with us? What is wrong with this team in the fourth quarter? And I've seen folks posit that maybe Michigan gets real conservative. Like, they kind of start turtling. Like, okay, we had we gave up a touchdown. Now we got to just try and just pull it all in and try and just bleed out the clock. I don't think that's it. I think for Michigan, somebody had suggested this, and I think this is the answer I would go with too. Michigan's offense is kind of feast or famine, right? So either they get a short field and cash it in. They did have a couple nice drives that end up with points, so I'll give them that. But the drives that don't, if you go back and look, there were, and I'm trying to check my notes here, 4 times. Yeah, 4 times in this game where Michigan went 3 and out. There was an additional drive that went 4 plays and then ended. So either Michigan is just putting this beautiful drive together and coming away with points, or it's immediately putting the defense back on the field. Yeah. And I think when that happens in critical moments, I mean, this is the flip. Minnesota makes it 24-14. Okay. So they take the interception, they go score. It's now 24-14. Immediate 3 and out for Michigan. And Minnesota takes a punt return all the way down into the red zone. In the span of about 3 game minutes, it has gone from 24-3 to 24-17. That can't happen. Is that entirely on the defense? No, but that's part of it. Is it entirely on the offense? No, but that's part of it. Is it on the special teams? No, but that punt return sure is the catalyst, right?
Yep.
So I think for Michigan, this is the unfortunate reality of the offense is feast or famine. I think that's who and I apologize. I can't remember who said, but I think whoever said that spot on. But the part that still is confusing to me is the offense is feast or famine all game. So what is causing the switch? Is this team just gassed? Is it a strength and conditioning issue? I know there's a big question when Ben Herbert left for the NFL to go with Harbaugh of what's strength and conditioning. And I'm not saying that that's it. I'm just saying for a fan, I'm looking at this and going, Michigan for years now has been the team that started kind of slow and at halftime was able to just make phenomenal adjustments and just, again, the Joel Klatt boa constrictor thing. Mm-hmm. This is the opposite of that, where Michigan's actually starting off pretty well and then just fading off at the end. You got away with it against USC. You got away with it against Minnesota. I don't know how many, you can't keep getting away with this. I don't know how many more times you can get away with that. You certainly can't when you play Oregon, Ohio State and company.
No. And I was watching this game. Granted, I saw a very narrow viewpoint of things, but I mean, I'm walking away looking at 240 yards of total offense against a not great Minnesota team. And I still, if I'm a Michigan fan, that worries me. I know you had 2 touchdown drives that were short yardage that was created by one was a defense and one was a punt that block punt that went nowhere. And that's and by the way, you had a touchdown drive of 16 yards and 11 yards. So
that's why I'm not concerned about that.
What the offensive's job is supposed to do. You got short yardage. That's not the offense's fault. They didn't have to drive down the field, but you were able to make those touchdowns rather than field goals, which is huge. That's the main goal when you're down there. So, but still looking at 240 yards, I go, okay, well, you played Minnesota, who's not great. Can that offense repeatedly drive the field to beat the teams, the Oregons, the Washingtons for that matter, the Ohio States? The one thing that I will give credit to them on is, again, this is, I think, the second time this season, third time, actually, if you want to count USC, because I think you guys did this. It was against Fresno State, I believe, where they started to kind of make that push and you guys drove all the way down the field. Now, it didn't end this week in a touchdown, but when you needed points, when it was 24-17 and the game was right there, Michigan's offense stepped up and drove down the field and got points to make it a 2-score game. And that
which ends up being critical.
Massive. And that is exactly what they had to go out and do. And they went out and they did it in a time when they needed to do it. So I'll give credit to them there. I think the defense played phenomenal the first half, like you said, but like you've been talking this whole time.
And I don't even know that I'd say that the defense didn't play phenomenal in the second half either.
The kick return was just a phenomenal play.
The kick return was just a punch in the teeth.
Yeah, that's not on the defense whatsoever. It's easy to box score watch this game and just go, you struggled against Minnesota.
Which to an extent is true, but also, and so I think that's the thing for Michigan. Like if you're like, okay, like Jace, like what's your full on takeaways? This team is confusing because this team is inconsistent. And there's a lot that you can look at Michigan and you can actually really like. I know it's easy and understandable to look at the negatives. Okay, there's a lot of negatives on this team. There's also a ton of positives. And so a game like this kind of encapsulates why this season is so frustrating, because there was so much that was really good. And then there are just those moments where you go, what in the world is happening here? By the way, for Minnesota fans that are still kind of hot about the offsides, I mentioned that, hey, there's an illegal block there. You can't do that. Resets, whatever. This was just, as an aside, just a poorly officiated game all the way around. I thought what ends up almost being a very critical moment. So Minnesota at the very end of the half just kind of lobs up a Hail Mary, gets the ball at the 2, rushes the field goal unit on and kicks it. By the way, like this feels sarcastic. A sincere, like that's incredible.
To be able to be that prepared to go out there and execute that is insane.
It reminded me of, and Michigan had more time for this, but Michigan played a game against Northwestern back in it was somewhere around 2012, 2013. Where rainy, ugly, like this was the bad Michigan era, right? And they're in like a 9-6 game with Northwestern. The clock's running and Brady Hoke just sends the field goal unit on. And I can still remember Drew Dillio just sliding across the grass into position to take the snap just in time. It almost reminded me a little bit of that, but the reason I bring that up is, one, phenomenal preparedness by PJ Fleck and his team right there. But if we're going to talk about officiating, the ball clearly hits the ground. It's not a completed catch.
Are you talking about on that catch?
On that catch. Ball hits the ground, not a completion, but because they move so quickly, there's no time to review it. Ends up being critical points. The Mason Graham hands to the face. This is the big one for Michigan.
Kind of weak.
Michigan, by the way, again, Michigan up 20. This is a big turning point because Michigan's up 24-3. They get the stop. It gets called back on hands to the face. I've watched it a lot. I don't think it's a penalty. I really don't. And by the way, I said this at RivalPod on Twitter. As a Detroit Lions fan, there's still some PTSD from when Detroit played Green Bay 2 or 3 seasons ago and got some pretty phantom hands to the face penalties to extend an Aaron Rodgers drive.
Happened yesterday in the Browns game against the Raiders, where they called Nick Harris on a holding, I think is what they ended up saying. But it was, clearly he's locked in, and that took away a touchdown.
And you had a future drive where TJ Guy's helmet gets ripped off, and there's no penalty call. So again, that's not the reason why Michigan was so close in this game. But if we're going to complain about officiating, this was just a poor job across the board. Here's some stuff I liked from this game, and then we'll transition to talk about Washington here.
Yeah.
I thought, we mentioned the defense played really well. Kalel Mullings, again, I love the fact I mentioned this earlier.
RB1 every single week. It just solidifies more and more. I appreciate
for as much frustration and heat as the coaching staff has taken for why are you not playing Kalel more? I don't think maybe they're listening to the podcast. Maybe that's it. But again, 24 carries to 9. I think that's exactly the way you should use it. I actually really like the play calling here. I thought it's a cautious, I've been calling it cautious creative, which is exactly what Michigan's skill set right now on offense. Cautious creative is what you need. I like that we're lining Donovan Edwards up wide. I think that's great. He oftentimes comes back inside, but again, even on the interception that gets thrown, Donovan Edwards is left just uncovered. I love the fact that is in the playbook and that we're willing to at least use it. Does it work out all the time? No, but the only way Alex is going to get better and more comfortable with that is you have to try stuff.
And I did think he made some pretty nice throws. I mean, he obviously didn't have the yardage, but he was like 10 of 18 for 80 or 90 something yards.
Which is it wasn't flashy. 3 times the amount we had last week.
Well, and it wasn't flashy, but he made the throws that he needed to throw. He did have a couple. I saw one to Colston Loveland that was a nice little throw.
Yeah.
He's getting better. Will Alex Orji ever be the 200+ yard
Absolutely
guy?
Not. No,
not a chance.
And you
already saw the change.
Him to be either.
And you already saw the change between him versus what you got with Davis Warren.
Yep.
And how it took them a handful of games of watching Davis Warren to figure that out baffles me. But they got there.
Back in the day, we used to do dumbest tweet of the week, which we don't do anymore. But I saw one this week where somebody was looking at Alex Orji, and it was post game. So again, I get that emotions are you're frustrated. Not that you won, obviously, but you're frustrated in the way in which you won. Which, as an aside, Sharon was pretty frustrated about that too, and so was Kalel, and they were both pretty vocal about that on the field after. I love that. It's like, well, yeah, of course they should be, but sometimes coaches hold that stuff back. I love the fact that you could tell Sharon was ticked off. That's exactly the type of fire that this team needs a little bit of. USC started that with, hey, here's an emotional win. Here's a win that's emotional in a different way.
Yep.
But the tweet had suggested in the aftermath of the game something about, based on what I'm seeing, should you go back to Davis Warren? I would.
Davis Warren loses you that game.
Davis Warren loses the USC game and this game.
Oh, Davis Warren, you get blown out against USC.
Here's what Alex Orji does well. And I understand that there's a critical mistake there on the interception. Absolutely. You also have to call plays like that up 24-3. Okay. You have to. That notwithstanding, what Alex does really well is he takes care of the football. I was texting my brother about this, and he noted, you want to see him. There's sometimes where he needs to just throw it away, and he'll maybe take a couple yard loss, or he'll try to get back to the line of scrimmage, and it'll be no gain, and it kind of washes itself out. I will take that 10 out of 10 times from just lobbing the ball up there to put in harm's way, which is what Davis was doing. So credit Alex. I agree. He's getting better. He looks more comfortable. He's never going to be outstanding. You don't need him to be. You need him to take care of the football and to be able to threaten in the run game so that he can make those nice tight end passes and stuff like that. This is what the offense is going to be. You don't have to love it.
It's not going to be fancy, flashy, or anything like that. And it's going to be,
and it doesn't
give the ball to the linebacker converted running back and Kalel Mullings that takes 9 armies to take down.
And make
it third and short, and you're set.
We've talked for weeks now about identity and how this is the identity. It's not gonna change. The beatings will continue until morale improves. But Kalel Mullings is the one dealing out the beatings. And until you can stop that, Michigan's going to keep running with it.
I am extremely interested in this week's game.
I am too. Before we do Michigan-Washington,
Okay.
I want, we do this thing called Rutgers to the Rose Bowl, where we talk about how likely it is that Rutgers could actually make the Rose Bowl. Rutgers got Washington this week.
Sure did. Friday night in Piscataway.
By the way, if you're not watching on YouTube at Rival Pod,
it had to happen.
Please do, because you've got the Block R hat. Is that a New Jersey?
I've had this for a while.
The New Jersey Rutgers Scarlet Knights.
I've had this for a while.
Okay. We've got the Rutgers helmet,
jersey
the flag.
is still present if you've watched episodes before. It is still here in the room. Hopefully that's a bad omen. The flag fell right there, so that's not ideal.
You talk about Rutgers.
I'm going to talk about Rutgers to the Rose
back
Bowl while Jace fixes this. Rutgers took on Washington under the lights in Piscataway. I forget what the spread for that game was, but Washington was the favorite heading into that. I don't think it was by a ton. Honestly, I thought Rutgers deserved to lose that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think Washington had 521 yards of offense.
Not to provide deep analysis on Rutgers, Washington, but if you watched that game, which I stayed up crazy late, sitting in my beanbag chair, Rutgers hoodie on, Roscoe, my dog, sitting beside me, waking up every 5 minutes when I would yell, tackle him, tackle him. Rutgers was outplayed, but, and we'll talk about this when we get to Ohio State, their defense, while they gave up a ton of yards, they bent, but they never broke. They had a handful of times where Washington got deep into the red zone and they didn't walk away with any points. They forced their kicker to go and make an attempt. The crowd was rowdy. I thought the offense for Rutgers did what it needed to do, which was exactly kind of the Michigan style offense. You give the ball to the most underrated running back in the nation and Kyle Monangai, and you let him just tank through it. Honestly,
it is hard to argue with that, by the way.
Him and Kalel Mullings kind of remind me of similar run styles, and somebody made the joke on Twitter.
And that under the radar, underrated guys.
I think when people look at Michigan, I still think people think of Donovan Edwards over Kalel Mullings, unless you pay attention to the team.
Right.
And that's kind of how Kyle Monangai is in the Big Ten, because you're shrouded by a bunch of really good running backs in Quinshawn, Travion, Kalel Mullings, Don Edwards, Katron Allen. Like, there's just a handful of names that he doesn't get talked about. But
quietly good.
quietly good. And that's kind of what this Rutgers team is. And so right now the Shiano meter's busting at the seams. I got it still at 4.5. But because this weekend they're going to be going to Lincoln, they're playing at Nebraska.
Oof.
If Rutgers goes into Lincoln and picks up a dub,
all right, simmer down.
You've got to do the. I will say though, after that Washington win, I did, for the first time in years, legitimately think, could this be a time where we see the Scarlet Knights ranked in the top 25? You've got a win over Virginia Tech, who we just saw push.
Absolutely robbed at Miami.
Robbed at Miami.
Like we all know it. We all
If you want to
it.
talk about poor officiating, watch the end of that game.
I've got a buddy who is a huge Miami Hurricanes fan, and he saw the shirt designs and stuff, and it said, "Hey, you told me that when we were nationally relevant, Rival Pod would make Miami shirts," and it took me everything in my power not to text him during that game and say, "Hey, sorry, you don't have to have gotten the benefit of a terrible replay to beat Virginia Tech."
If you want to talk about that. So Rutgers has key wins against Virginia Tech that their record's not good, but they did just compete very well and honestly should have beat Miami. Then they go in and they beat Washington, who I know Washington lost a handful of players. It's still a decent team.
We have spent so much time on Rutgers analysis.
As we should. They deserve a little bit more respect.
Okay.
They deserve a little bit more respect.
The reason that we mentioned Rutgers is because Michigan's got Washington this week. First road game of the year in Seattle, prime time. Watching the Rutgers game, because I'm assuming you watched parts of it.
I did. Yeah. Watching that, knowing that Washington was next up for you.
So here's the interesting thing, and this is not a 1-to-1 comparison because I think Michigan's a much better football team, but the style of play that Rutgers, and you said this, the style that Rutgers plays.
The defense for Michigan is better than Rutgers.
Ironically, the style of offense that they run, which is just handing the ball, is very similar. It's not 1-to-1, but it's similar. So I was interested in, does the Rutgers model, and again, Michigan being a far upgraded version, even on a weak offense,
an upgraded version.
Okay, is it successful? And the answer was yeah. Yeah, the answer was yeah. Kyle Monangai put up yards. Let's see, 184 rushing yards by Rutgers. I think the Washington defense is going to be pretty susceptible to Kalel Mullings.
Yeah, they're very similar in their bigger bodied running backs.
You know the game plan for Michigan is going to be run the ball. Everybody and their brother knows it. There's a difference between knowing it and stopping it. When Michigan, different teams, but last year Michigan at Penn State ran the ball, famously 32 times or whatever. Penn State knew it was coming. They could not stop it. Do you have Blake Corum on the team? No. But Kalel is playing incredibly well. He's been compared to Hassan Haskins.
Well,
and I think that's a great
thing
comparison.
with him is, and it's the same thing that you saw the issue with them tackling Kyle Monangai, is it's not a guy that you bring down with one dude.
No.
It takes 2 or 3 of them to get him down, and eventually you get gassed.
I think that between Michigan's running game, I think Washington's defense will have difficulty. Washington's offense is a little bit strange to me because they will put up a ton of yards. They had 521 against Rutgers. I'm trying to find in my notes. I had written it down. They had I'll put this. They had a ton of yards against Washington State as well.
And Will Rogers is not a bad quarterback.
No, he's not. However, Michigan's defense is very good. Michigan's defense is very good. I think the Michigan defense will be able to stuff the running game for them, and I think Will Rogers will throw the ball a ton. I think he's going to throw the ball a ton. I think he will test the secondary. And some of that will come down to health of players. Will Johnson did not play in this game again on Saturday. Josiah Stewart did not play, and obviously not secondary, but Josiah Stewart, Will Johnson, both did not play in that game. 2 of Michigan's best players on the defense. Makari Page was banged up. I don't know his status yet. Hopefully, again, we record these right before Sharon's press conference on Mondays. Hopefully we'll get some clarity on Makari Page as well. So some of it depends on the health of Michigan. I think I can see Washington getting yards, but I love the bend don't break philosophy because I think you'll see a lot of that. I think Michigan's pass rush between Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Josiah Stewart, knock on wood that man's healthy. I think they can cause some real trouble for him. I just think Michigan's a tougher team. I have got Michigan. Michigan beat USC 27-24. They beat Minnesota 27-24. Give me Michigan 27-24.
Okay.
I think Washington ends up getting their yards. I think they get their points, but this is also a team that was down what 21-10 to Rutgers with under 2 to go.
Yeah.
Okay. So credit Washington for pulling themselves back in it. 21-10 to Rutgers with 2 minutes left in the game. Like with a Michigan defense, I don't see Washington having enough.
I think
to out tough Michigan.
I think part of that was Rutgers is a sneaky, tough place to play when there's a big game. So I do think part of that played a factor. I think I'm with you on some key points that you said. I think I'll say my prediction and then I'll kind of explain why. I've got Michigan winning 24-21. So
okay, so we're not far off. Yeah.
I think it's a little bit sweatier of a game for you solely because it's a night game, and I think Washington's going to show up and be loud. I think your defense is significantly better than what Rutgers proved to be, but I think you have that same mentality where I think there's going to be a handful of drives where Washington's going to make it down to the red zone, but I just don't see Michigan breaking. It's the same thing you're going to see at what you saw against Rutgers. The difference is, I think, while Rutgers had a better passing attack, I do think Kalel Mullings is better than Kyle Monangai right now. I just think he's got a better line behind him. I know people have been talking about Rutgers' offensive line all season so far. They've been dominant.
And Michigan's has been a little bit iffy. It's been a lot better, but it's been a little bit iffy.
But I think Michigan's going to go through. They're going to be able to run the ball very well. I think having a more mobile quarterback is going to help the offense look a little bit better. Callie McManus for Rutgers is he can, but he's not known for that.
Where Alex,
so I think adding that dynamic,
it can freeze the defense enough. And
I think as much as I've ripped on Donovan Edwards, I think having him in a game like this where you can help Kalel stay a little fresher is going to benefit you guys in a massive way.
And he adds a wrinkle to a passing game too, right?
100%. And I think having a go-to guy, Rutgers didn't have a go-to receiver. So I think you guys having a go-to guy in Colston Loveland is going to be massive for you. I've not seen enough from your offense outside of Mullings. And while I don't think Washington's defense is anything to write home about, I think you guys get it done, but I just don't see the capacity that you guys have on offense to blow anybody out.
No.
And I think if this was at Michigan, I would have a little bit farther apart. But because it's a night game under the lights,
I think the open for the spread, I believe when it opened,
it's 2.5 right now.
Is it for Washington?
It's 2.5 for Washington. They're favored.
I was gonna say I think it opened at 1.5. So okay, so about a 3-point game
said,
either way.
I genuinely Will Rogers. He was at Mississippi State last year, right? And
he's not a bad quarterback.
He's a phenomenal. I think he's great.
Here's where Michigan. I'm going to keep my prediction obviously, but here's where Michigan I think can get in trouble. Is again, we talked about the second half flip, right? Mm-hmm. So Michigan, let's say Michigan does kind of ground and pound. They get up by a couple scores on Washington, not a ton, but they get up by 2 scores. Okay, they're up by 10, 14, whatever. Yeah. Washington with that quarterback is a team that can come back like that.
Yep,
and that's going to be the danger. Is okay, it's 21-10. All of a sudden it's 21-17. Your offense just went 3 and out and punted the ball back. That's where Washington gets really dangerous. Mm-hmm. So Michigan playing a complete game is going to be essential because if they don't, I don't think this team gets out of Seattle alive. I'm saying that I think Michigan plays a much more robust game across the board.
Do you have 27-24?
27-24. Give me Michigan in this one. Hey, maybe you feel a little bit like Jonathan Smith in Michigan State. You know what you're doing is not working. You need to transfer in a little bit of help. Thankfully, our friends at Elevated Integrity Construction are the portal to a successful project. Aaron Carroll and his team, they've been doing this a long time. Their good plans will not be intercepted, unlike Aiden Childs. They're going to communicate openly and honestly, leave you wowed at the finished product. For your home, church, or business build, go with the folks with integrity in their name. It's ElevatedIntegrity.com. We are also proud this year to be part of the Varsity Network powered by Learfield, a must-have for every college football fan. Free to download in the App Store and Google Play Store to enjoy live college football games and podcasts just like this one. Search for your school, find tailored content, and be sure to search for the Rivalry Podcast in the Varsity Network app. The other thing that I'll throw out there too, again, social media at RivalPod, rivalpod.com. Got blog articles that go up every week, gallery from the games. You can watch on YouTube there as well. Find links to our social. Here's the other thing that you can do is you can get yourself, we've got these shirts here. We mentioned this earlier. You've seen us promote them. These shirts are just absolutely gorgeous. Like, dare we say
crazy
so.
Comfortable.
We didn't design them, okay? But a friend of ours here at the River designed these. These are fantastic shirts. You can go ahead and get your own in whatever colors you need to. And know that you're supporting the podcast when you do that. If you already have a shirt, you're like, hey, that's not really my thing, but I want to support you guys anyway. We've got this feature. It's called Buy Me a Buckeye. It's basically like buy me a coffee, but you get it. Okay. You're tracking with it. It's just a way to give a little bit to support the podcast. We've got opportunities coming up for some road games, potentially, of course, for some playoff games. And so that helps a small budget podcast like this. So thank you for considering supporting either through Buy Me a Buckeye at rivalpod.com or by purchasing a shirt at the same location. We appreciate that. All right, let's talk about the Buckeyes. Let's talk about the Buckeyes. Let's talk about Ohio State, Michigan State this weekend. Michigan State is a butt team.
They are.
Wow.
Man, it just felt poetic that at some point you knew Aiden Childs was going to throw an interception or turn the ball over, and you were just waiting for it. I will say, though, I know a lot of people, and I'm going to sound a little bit like a hater on this, are like, well, we won 38-7. There was a lot that I took away that was a negative from this game. And I guess you could still spin it to be a positive, but I wanted to tally this up. So you had the first drive by Michigan State was a turnover on downs, which I actually liked the call.
Yeah, I like the decision to go for it, but going saying, "Hey, I'm going to put Aiden Childs one-on-one with Cody Simon over the top" is not the call.
It's not the call. Yeah. It wasn't the right call, but it was the right
decision.
Call.
Yeah.
It wasn't the right play call. It was the right call to go for
Absolutely.
it. Absolutely.
And by the way, it was refreshing, as much as I hate State, to hear a coach say, "Yeah, we're not going to win this game kicking field goals."
Yes,
like to straight up say it.
And
thank you.
And facts. The second drive, they fumbled at the Ohio State 19. Then I had it written down somewhere. Then later on, you had Childs fumbled at the OSU 16. Those are 3 drives deep in Ohio State's territory where Ohio State bent, but they didn't break. And I think you were able to get, and both of those turnovers were from Lathan Ransom, where he was able to go in and get the fumble, and then I believe the other one was a fumble as well. I forget by who.
Punched the ball out.
But he punched the ball out. Great, phenomenal defensive plays by Lathan Ransom. If you're Ohio State and you're bringing in an experienced elite defense from last year where you return most of the guys, you've got to perform better than that. And I'm thinking even back last week against Marshall, you gave up 14 points, you gave up 200 yards. Jim Knowles came out and said, I'm not giving a silver bullet out to anybody because we can't be giving up 14 points. I know they gave it to Caleb Downs this week. I would have given it to nobody. I'm just saying I would have given it to nobody. I'm walking away from that game and I'm going, sure, if you're scoreboard watching, it's 38-7. This could have been 38-24. And I'm not feeling great about that. Yeah. It's still a double-digit score, sure.
It felt early like Ohio State kept inviting Michigan State to play in this game, and Michigan State kept saying, "Nah, we good."
And there was another circumstance too where it was the opposite for Ohio State, where Ohio State was being gifted the game. They were getting these turnovers, and then they were going out and doing absolutely nothing. It was like Michigan State was opening the door and saying, "Okay, well, I should probably get to bed and I got to get going." And they were opening the door, and Ohio State was just still sitting there munching on some M&Ms. And it's like, bro, they're trying to get you out of their house and give you the win. I was walking away from this game with Will Howard, and I even tweeted it out on the Rival Pod's Twitter account, @RivalPod, if you want to follow us. And I was like, man, he looks locked in. Early on, he was throwing the ball well, had some open guys, was making some really tight throws. And he had two decisions where I got flashbacks, like a war vision of Kyle McCord, where I think it was
right after you tweeted it, too.
It was right after I tweeted it, of course, where they were in the red zone and he threw a pass in the end zone that should have been picked off. How it wasn't is beyond me. And then he had another one where he threw it directly into two Michigan State defenders. And I don't understand what he thought he saw, because everybody, me in Mansfield, Ohio, from my TV screen went, why in the world would you throw that? There were clearly two defenders. Yeah. It wasn't even like one was disguised somewhere and made a great break on the ball. They were latched onto him like super glue. Yeah. And so I watched that and I'm going, as great of a game as he ended up having overall, I look at that and I look at those two mistakes, one being in the red zone where you absolutely can't have that happen. The other one was, I think we were still on our side of the field, if I remember right.
Yeah. It was thrown. I mean, I think it was picked off around the 40 and it set up the one Michigan State touchdown.
Yeah. And because it was the next play. It was, the very next play.
And the other thing too is like, again, Michigan State is not a good defense. This is not a good football team.
No.
Aiden Childs will have those flashes where it's like, okay, you see potential, but he's not a good quarterback.
You can see the talent in Childs. You can see it in Nick Marsh. They've got a foundation. What it will eventually build to, who knows? Yeah. But you could see it there. They're obviously not there yet.
And that's where, Will Howard's play for sure. The secondary for Ohio State, and you kind of mentioned this, like Michigan State was able to exploit that.
And I think
they didn't end up doing anything with it. Yeah. And if Michigan had a quarterback that could throw the ball downfield, I'd be pretty excited about that. But for teams that can, this is where for me, and I'm going to lean heavy into the Michigan side of the podcast. This is where for me, I look at the schedule and I go, you ain't played anybody with all the hype. So I get the hype surrounding the team. I get that this is a very good football team. I understand that, but you ain't played anybody outside of the MAC and of Michigan State, where the excitement and the hype around this, this defense is locked down. Who are you locking down? Akron? Well, and that's the thing where it's like, it's not a question of, is this a good team? It's the level to which it's being touted. And I get that I live in Columbus and that this is where it's at. I look at this and I go, let's maybe pump the brakes a little bit.
Well,
here.
We're going to find out, because the next 4 games, you've got Iowa this weekend, which we'll talk about. Yep. Then you go on the road under the lights at Oregon. Okay, for sure, a test there.
100%.
If they walk away a winner from that,
feel good.
Great win. Then after that, you're Nebraska at home.
Yeah, you've got the bye week.
Then you got Nebraska at home. Then the week after that, you're at Penn State. These next 4 games are going to tell you everything you need to know.
Bingo.
And I forget where I heard it from, but somebody was talking about this and they said, and it honestly kind of brought me back to reality a little bit, where they said, it's actually good that this game happened for Ohio State, because there were a handful of moments. You don't want to go into those 4 stretches of games not being tested whatsoever.
Yeah.
And while Michigan State wasn't testing Ohio State, there were moments where Ohio State had to step up.
There was some adversity.
Where on defense, they had to prevent Michigan State from doing anything with it, which I had talked about early. They never broke. Then you go on the offensive side of things. You go, okay, Will Howard, I need you to do something here. You've got to make a tight throw. And he was able to come out and do that. You needed those moments going into these bigger stretch of games. So while I look at Will Howard throwing 2 bad decisions, which I think, and I've talked about it numerous times on this podcast, Will Howard was brought in to not make those mistakes.
Correct.
And while this was a team that you could afford to make those mistakes, If you do those two exact throws against Oregon,
you can't keep doing that.
If you do that against Oregon and you ruin a red zone trip by a turnover and you allow Dylan Gabriel to have short field,
when points become at a premium,
yes, and
that's going to be a big deal.
And you need them. I did say the one thing that I wanted to make sure I hit on for this. There were two positives actually. The one was I actually really liked Ryan Day's aggressiveness. There were a handful of times where if this was previous year Ryan Day, he would have punted it and just played it safe. There were probably 2 or 3 circumstances where they were deep in the territory, and deep, I mean, they were 40-something yard line, maybe close to midfield, where he decided to go for it and they were able to get it. I love that because that's just not something we've seen from him often.
It's been the biggest. It's outside of obviously,
and you've got to be
cautious.
One
of the biggest
you've got to be cautious with it. You don't want to overdo it like Kevin Stefanski and the Browns, but like you want to be able, you want to find your moment where you want to kind of step up and decide you got to go for it.
Even early on, right after Howard nearly threw the pick in the end zone.
Yeah,
3-0, could have kicked the field goal and probably been fine. Decides to go for it, pays off.
Mm-hmm.
Was it I think it's a good decision. Why not? Right?
Or something like that.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I don't know if I would have hated it if that circumstance was against Oregon. I think that's one of those moments where I go, you're at the one.
You've got to trust your guys.
You're at the one. If you can't, and I said it years ago against the Georgia, if you can't trust that offensive line, the running back duo of Quinshawn, a bigger bodied quarterback with Will Howard to get you a yard, you don't deserve to win the game anyways. So I liked his aggressiveness. I also liked how sneaky good the run game seemed to be. I think it got swept under the rug because not one player had like a flashy game overall.
Yeah.
But as a group, as a unit, they still had, I think, like 180 something yards on the ground collectively. It's weird because had you told me prior James Peoples would have had more carries than Travion Henderson, my immediate thought would have been, is he dead? Like, did Travion get hurt? Yeah. But he just didn't need to. I think him or Quinshawn averaged like 9.9 yards a carry. I mean, he was super efficient.
I think Peoples has had more carries this season than Travion. Hasn't he? Yeah.
Because it's been the way the games have played out, where he's not needed to do stuff. Him and Quinshawn were effective again. I thought there were a handful of plays that weren't impact plays. They were impact plays, but they're not statistical impacts. Like there was one play on a run. I don't remember who the running back was, but you saw Emeka Ibuka come around the outside and make just a phenomenal block to open it up. I want to say it was for Henderson to be able to get a nice little lane and go. You've seen grittier plays like that throughout the season that you just weren't seeing in years past. And so I was encouraged for that. I thought even in a game where you didn't see a Quinshawn 100-yard game or a Travion, they still were able to get stuff going on the ground.
Here's one thing I want to hit on real quick, and then we'll pivot to Iowa. Is Jeremiah Smith is a phenomenal football player. First of all,
indescribable.
Here's the thing that I legit do not understand, and I kind of think it's hilarious, but it annoys me also. You would put out the question of, okay, I think you said something to the effect of Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver Ohio State's ever seen.
Yeah.
We are 4 games in.
Look,
and again, this, for me, it's not a question of potential. The potential is there. Holy cow. For me, I'm going, this is prisoner of the moment type stuff.
Oh, for sure.
This is looking at, and it's not just you, by the way. Like I've seen, like,
I'm fine if it was.
I get the love for him, but what I don't get is going, look at the schedule you've played. Akron, Western, Marshall, Michigan State. And after those 4 games going, this is the greatest receiver that we have ever seen at this school, is absolutely nonsense. Could he be? Absolutely he could be.
I don't know,
but to look at it and go, yeah, we've had, we've had all these just amazing, we've had Boston Scott and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Olave and Wilson and just
since the first season I remember watching Ohio State was a couple years before the championship season in 2002. So I'll go ahead and say 2000. I've been an Ohio State fan for 24 years of my life, where I've watched every single game that I possibly can for 24 seasons. I'm not willing that when I tweeted that, it was half joking, half serious because he made a sick, nasty one-handed grab, and I was just
I was
just jacked up.
It was very nice.
Because I also misspelled that tweet. So
thank you for that.
So I'm jacked up because of that. I'm not willing to put him over Marv yet, but I'm with you in the sense I think if he's healthy, he stays at Ohio State, doesn't transfer out. I don't see it not being a thing. But I will say right now, he's already shown me he's better than Emeka is. And I don't even think the gap is close. He's better than Ted Ginn Jr.
See,
he's better than Chris Olave.
This is the stuff where I go, you got to pump the brakes, man. He's played 4 games against MAC
I've seen what I've needed to see.
You've played the MAC.
I've seen what I've needed to see.
You cannot declare somebody the best receiver school's ever seen.
I do declare
4 games.
I declare it.
But opponents.
You're hearing me declare it right now on the podcast.
All right,
Jeremiah Smith.
Please stop.
I'm just gonna say it. Best receiver in Ohio State history.
Let's move on because we got to finish up here and talk about Iowa. Iowa is
a little trap game here.
Iowa, I don't know what to do with Iowa. I really don't. Let me tell you what I hope. Here's what I hope.
Well, I know what you hope.
Well, besides the obvious.
Yeah.
What I hope is that Iowa's game plan, even if they don't win this game, obviously I want them to. My hope is that Iowa's game plan has success. Because that's going to be the same game plan Michigan's going to roll out.
Hand the ball to Kaleb Johnson a billion times.
Let him do it, right? So, like, Iowa is the greater Rutgers probably here. Michigan's the greater Iowa. Like, there's tiers to this things.
Don't you disrespect me? Don't you disrespect the Scarlet Knights? One of them's undefeated and one of them's not.
Gosh. One of them played Texas. One of them played...
I'm not talking Michigan. I'm talking Iowa.
Oh, well, anyway. Regardless, I want to see just the game plan. Does Iowa's game plan work against Ohio State? Because that will give me a feel for Michigan's game plan at the end of November, because it's going to be the same thing. And I think, you nailed it. This offense is Kaleb Johnson and Kaleb Johnson only.
Yeah. Cade McNamara is averaging like 130 something yards passing.
It's not
He's
great,
buns.
but here's the thing too. Cade McNamara has also beaten Ohio State
in a game where he also split with JJ. So
not much though. And again, I think number one, I don't think Cade's actually at the level he was when he was at Michigan. Even.
No.
2, he doesn't have the receiving core that he had around him at Michigan, even as, hey, good, not great as that core was at the time. What I'm more interested in though is, it's to hand the ball off to Kaleb Johnson, but knowing that Cade, frankly, has beaten Ohio State and has beaten Ohio State in a game plan that was basically run Hassan Haskins a whole heckin' lot and then throw the ball in distinct moments. Yeah. So I'm very curious to see what that looks like. Obviously, Iowa's defense is going to be a massive storyline too, where what does that look like for Jeremiah Smith? What does it look like for the run game? What does it look like for Will Howard? The combination of Iowa's defense with a really strong run game could make it interesting. But there's a big question mark there because Ohio State is just leaps and bounds more talented across the board than Iowa is. I don't know that there's much more than that. No,
I think you said it perfectly. I think the biggest key is obviously going to be stopping Kaleb Johnson. You've got to go in if you're Ohio State's defense, you got to be able to create 3rd and long situations for McNamara to have to throw.
Yep.
If you're able to do that, and I think another way you do that is by executing on offense, getting up double digits and forcing their game plan to change.
Yep.
You can't have it be a close game. Yeah, you can't have it be a close game where they're still able to run Kaleb Johnson the entirety of the game. You've got to have it be double digits early on. You got to jump on him when you get the chance, and you got to force Cade McNamara to beat you with his arm, because that's the way you're going to be able to blow this team out.
What do you have?
I have my final. I know right now the spread was 20.5. I think it'll be.
Oh my gosh, it jumped.
It jumped. What was it before?
It was 17.5 when I looked yesterday when I was doing my notes.
As of this morning, which is a Monday, it is 20.5 OSU. I think it'll be a little bit better than that. I have Ohio State 35, Iowa 10.
I think it's a little sweatier than that.
Of course you do.
31-17. I think
it just depends. It depends on what, if the Ohio State defense that could shows up, it'll be my score. If they come out a little lackadaisical to begin with.
I just think Iowa's game plan is going to be obviously run the ball. It's going to be time of possession. I think, this is where you'll have some key moments, right? Where Iowa holds the ball for 8 minutes and scores a touchdown, even if they kick a field goal. If the defense then forces a short drive from Ohio State and gets the ball back, okay, it's stuff like that flips this game. I don't think Ohio State loses the game for sure, but I think it's sweatier than people would like it to be. And I think maybe it starts to bubble up a little bit of consternation going, okay, we're not playing the MAC anymore. We're playing a team with a pulse. Now, at the same time, Iowa is still Iowa. All right. Iowa has struggled in these games away from Kinnick Stadium. Okay. I don't know the last time Iowa beat Ohio State in Columbus. I don't know the last time Iowa beat Michigan at Michigan. I know Kinnick is where dreams go to die. Kinnick at night is the world's worst haunted house. But you don't have to worry about that. So yeah, give me 31-17 Ohio State in this one. The last thing we need to get to here, I think it'll be, by the way, I think that'll be a real interesting football game. Like I know people were interested.
There's enough to keep you interested. It's easy to look at the name and go, well, it's Iowa, but Kaleb Johnson's a dude.
And it'll be worth watching just to see how Ohio State kind of handles some of that. I think it'll be interesting. The last thing we got to get to here, Stupid Genius, still 7.5-0.
Yeah. I thought Louisville was going to help me out this weekend.
They did not. I picked against Kansas State, which was a big mistake. Yes. Don't do that. What do you have for your Stupid Genius this week?
My Stupid Genius this week, I've got SMU over Louisville. They are 7-point underdogs right now. SMU dominated Florida State this past weekend.
Florida State is a train wreck.
The only loss that they have on their record right now is to a BYU team that we're finding out is pretty dang good.
BYU is a dangerous football team.
And they only lost by 3. So I'm going SMU over Louisville. I thought Louisville would get me the dub. This is a little bit punishment to them for not helping me out. So I've got SMU over to number 22 Louisville. I think they knock them out of the top 25. And maybe, honestly, get themselves into it.
Are you ready for mine?
No, what is it? It's going to be dumb.
+6 in Lincoln.
Rutgers? You chose them? Oh, Jake, you gotta.
I really don't want to.
Gotta. Put the teal jersey on. You've gotta. You can't pick Rutgers for Stupid Genius and not wear the Mike Teal jersey.
Mike Teal was a punter, yeah?
How dare you? I know we haven't had great quarterbacks, but we've got one right there. Mike Teal and those Scarlet Knights. Let's go.
I really hate this. Actually, I don't. I don't know what to make of Nebraska. Nebraska obviously had a tough game against Illinois. Thought they played well, but then looked kind of like trash for a lot of the game against a very bad Purdue team. I think it was 0-0 at the half.
And I would say Will Rogers right now is better than what you're going to see out of Raiola. Yeah, I think the potential is obviously Raiola is going to be a stud Heisman favorite guy down the
Nebraska
road.
I still think is good. I'm not quite sure what to make of them right now. And frankly, I know what to make of Rutgers. They know what they are.
From your lips to God's ears.
They're a defensive team. They're going to run Kyle Monangai. And I just don't know if Nebraska's got enough juice right now.
And I think people are still underrating them.
And Lincoln's a tough place to play. That's why it's called Stupid Genius.
I love that. Give me that all day.
This is where it pauses and goes, you're probably wondering how I found myself in this situation.
And a Mike Teal jersey doing the chop. Let's go.
Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening right now, whether you're in the Varsity Network app, on Apple Pod, whatever that it looks like for you. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to follow at Rival Pod on social. And again, if you'd like to support the podcast, either through buying one of the t-shirts or you just want to give a little gift and say, hey, appreciate what you guys are doing, rivalpod.com. Just click on the little support tab. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. Have another great weekend of football.
OH.
The Rivalry is a production of River Radio Ministries. Want live updates from the show? Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at RivalPod. To learn how to support the show, shop our merch, and read our blogs, visit rivalpod.com. Make sure to follow us wherever you're listening now. And if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend so they can listen too.